The two Wion Exclusive interviews with former Royal Air Force pilot Michelle Morris, better known as Lord Naseby, are rocking Colombo's parliament even as Sri Lanka's Prime Minister, fresh on the heels of the questioning a scam-related matter, arrived in India. Lord Naseby first told Wion that the United Nations had fudged war casualty figures, and in the second, he reacted with skepticism to a controversial film in which 50 Sri Lankan Tamil asylum seekers alleged rape and torture at the hands of security forces in 2016. A UN rapporteur on a Sri Lanka tour dodged questions posed by a senior Sri Lankan editor on the British parliamentarians' revelations on this channel. Wion senior foreign editor Padma Rao, who worked on that story with Mandy Clark, our correspondent in London, brings you this report.
When Wion spoke to Lord Naseby for the first time just over a week ago, the British parliamentarian had not yet disclosed in public just what he had told the House of Lords about the controversial casualty figure of 40,000, the number of civilians a UN Special Investigation Committee had propagated to the entire world. Now the country was facing repeated resolutions at the UNHCR in Geneva. The head of a parliamentarians group supportive of Sri Lanka, Lord Naseby, then told Wion some home truths. Listen in.
I tracked the war carefully, and I thought to myself, I can't actually believe these official figures because it didn't stack up to the information I was getting. So what I did was I asked for a freedom of information inquiry of what dispatches were sent by our defence attaché, that's the UK defence attaché, to the Foreign Office through the latter days of the war. And the dispatches, I was refused them by the Foreign Office, appealed twice, still refused, then appealed to the Information Commissioner, which is my right. He understood why I was actually asking these questions, and lo and behold I got 26 pages of redacted dispatches. Missing were the last 6 weeks of the war, so I put in an appeal to him, and lo and behold another 12 arrived. And armed with that, I went through them very carefully, and in there was more than enough evidence that no one in the Sri Lankan government had said about killing any civilians at all. That was not the objective of the exercise. And indeed the indications were from him, that is our defence attaché, that it was about 7,000 civilians probably killed. But even he says that a quarter of those were quite possibly Tamil Tigers because they'd thrown away their uniforms. And then those what were called civilian casualties undoubtedly included probably 25% Tamil Tigers. So having done that, I then looked back on, well, who else has done some research? And I went to the university teachers, who are a pretty left-wing organisation. They said, about 7,000, that's our estimate. I then looked at the other evidence. Ambassador Blake, US ambassador, with only a few days to go, was reckoning there was about 5,000.
But even as Sri Lankans were digesting and heaving a sigh of relief at the long-awaited truth based upon the UK's own defence attaché's findings, a film surfaced. It showed 20 of a reported 50 Sri Lankan men seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. They claimed that the scars on their torsos were from cigarette butts and branding by the Sri Lankan security forces in 2016, that is 7 years after the end of the war. Wion sought out Lord Naseby again, and he spoke up again about self-infliction by proxy, a not unknown occurrence among asylum seekers in the United Kingdom.
Well, it's very interesting, this report. Of course, we are now near the end of 17, and one wonders why it's taken quite so long to come out. And if there is any torture of that nature, then it's entirely unacceptable. However, I just observed two things. Firstly, that we've recently had an asylum seeker case here in the UK with a Sri Lankan who had similar burns and stuff on his back, on his arms, but the conclusion of the appeal judge was that these had been self-inflicted, and he must have had some help to do it, but they are far too clearly defined as burns, etc., to have been done by anybody who really was roughening somebody up.
By now, Sri Lanka's leading daily The Island picked up the story where Wion left off, when its editors learned that UN Special Rapporteur Pablo de Greiff was on a private trip in Sri Lanka and meeting with officials. They contacted him for a response to the allegations made by Lord Naseby to Wion. Did you admit to the Sri Lankan officials you met that you, the United Nations, bloated sevenfold the casualty figure of 7,000 that parties on the ground like your own man here, the ICRC and Britain's defence attaché, had themselves confirmed? Meanwhile, the government of Sri Lanka under President Maithripala Sirisena has been facing all kinds of troubles. Massive external debt, controversial deals with China, a corruption scam involving central bank bonds, anti-Muslim violence and no headway over the long-pending question of granting Tamil citizens maximum autonomy in the north and south. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe sought some relief from the gods. The head of government arrived in New Delhi today, but not before offering prayers at Karnataka's Mookambika temple, a favoured family shrine. The Prime Minister's brief visit in Delhi will be full of meetings with his Indian counterpart and other ministers. But the cacophony in Colombo's parliament is certain to have reverberated even more than 3,000 kilometres away in the Indian capital. Wion's 2 exclusive reports had an impact. Colombo's parliament was up in arms against such serious and mysterious manipulation by the United Nations. The opposition also demanded to know what President Sirisena's government was doing about it. The Island reports that the UN Special Rapporteur met with President Sirisena, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and a host of other top ministers of the Sri Lankan government. And the Daily also remarked that to call such meetings quote-unquote private meetings was an obvious attempt by the UN Rapporteur to avoid a direct answer to the fudged figures. But did Colombo officials demand to know themselves from him why his organisation did so? There is one dignitary who can answer that question. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, currently in India. Padma Rao, Wion.